Tam of the Tam BOTC channel, and I will be doing a read-along of Dan Simmons' Hyperion. I learned about this book through some YouTubers, and I wanted to check this out, because I hear it has a creature called the Shrike that is one of the scariest creatures in fiction. There's also a book I will be reading that I have heard is one of the scariest books of science fiction. And I'm looking through the books that Dan Simmons has wrote. The only one that I recognize is the Hollow Man, and for good reason, because they made a movie on that. But if I like this, I've never read this book, by the way, then I will definitely pick up more. I will probably read to the rest of the series. Hopefully the rest of the books are good or better, even. I get a feeling that maybe the last two books aren't quite as good, but maybe, or maybe it's the middle two books that might be the best. Who knows? Other than people who have read this and love it. So I've never read this. I'm starting on the prologue. This is Dan Simmons' Hyperion. I hope you enjoy. I don't know how many chapters I will do. I will probably list that on the video's title after I see how many I can manage for this, because it takes a long time to read books, especially for me, since I'm a slower reader. I process things a little slower, so hopefully I can manage a couple of chapters or whatever. I did finish the Beastars book 1 in like one video. Did take like over an hour, but I was surprised that I got it in one video, along with giving an intro and outro like I am now. Alright, the prologue of Hyperion. I don't know how I'm going to go about reading this, so should I try Maldron? I don't know if I should make this scary or just interesting. Alright. I already see a couple of words in here. The hegemony consul sat on the balcony of his ebony spaceship and played Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor on an ancient but well-maintained Steinway, while great green Sarian, I hope the audio is doing well too, things surged and bellowed in the swamps below. A thunderstorm was brewing in the north. Bruise black clouds silhouetted silhouetted. I read that wrong. A forest of giant gymnosperms. Okay. While Stratocumulus towered 9 kilometers high in a violent sky. Man, this is making me look like a dumbass. But it's good for me to be able to read. I want to do more reading anyways, especially recently, because I spent a long time away from reading, and it would be great to do this. Get back into reading again. And I feel like I got dumber not doing so much focusing on video games for the channel. I really do sometimes. Lightning rippled along the horizon, closer to the ship. Occasional vague reptilian shapes would blunder into the interdiction field, cry out, and then crash away through indigo mists. The consul concentrated on a difficult section of the prelude. I don't know why, like, words I do know are giving me a problem for some reason. And ignored the approach of the storm and nightfall. The fat line? What? Man, they're fat-shaming lines now. Receiver chimed. The console stopped, fingers hovering above the keyboard, and listened. Thunder rumbled through the heavy air from the direction of the ginormous sperm. Forced there came the mournful ululation of a carrion breed pack. Somewhere in the darkness below, a small-brained beast trumpeted its answering challenge and fell quiet. The interdiction field added its sonic undertones to the sudden silence. The fat line chimed again. It is fat line, what the hell? Thought it was going to be flat line. Damn, said the council, and went in to answer it. It really is Shadow the Hedgehog. You have Sonic and damn. While the computer took a few seconds to convert and decode the burst of decaying tachyons, the console poured himself a glass of scotch. He settled into the cushions of the projection pit just as the disky blinked green. Play, he said. You have been chosen to return to Hyperion, came a woman's husky voice. Okay. Full visuals had not yet formed. The air remains. That was not a woman's voice. I'm not good at women's voices anyways. Empty, except for the pulse of transmission codes, which told the console. It's not council, it's console. This is weird. That this fat line squirt had originated on the hegemony. Jeez. Administrative world of Tau Ceti Center. The console did not need the transmission coordinates to know this. The aged but still beautiful voice of Miena Gladstone was unmistakable. You have been chosen to return to Hyperion as a member of the Shrike Pilgrimage, continued the voice. The hell you say? That the console and rose to leave the pit. You and 6 others have been selected by the Church of the Shrike and confirmed by the All-Thing, said Miena Gladstone. It is in the interest of the hegemony that you accept. The council stood motionless in the pit, his back to the flickering transmission codes without turning. He raised his glass and drained the last of the scotch. The situation is very confused, said Miena Gladstone. Her voice was weary. The consulate and Home Rule Council fat-lined us 3 standard weeks ago with the news that the time tombs showed signs of opening. The entropic fields around them were expanding rapidly, and the Shrike has begun reigning as far south as the Bridle Range. The console turned and dropped into the cushions. A hollow had formed of Miena Gladstone's ancient face. Her eyes looked as tired as her voice sounded. A space task force was immediately dispatched from Parvati to evacuate the hegemony citizens on Hyperion before the time tombs open. Their time debt will be a little more than 3 Hyperion years. Miena Gladstone paused. The consul thought he had never seen a Senate CEO look so grim. We do not know if the evacuation fleet will arrive in time, she said, but the situation is even more complicated. An oyster migration cluster of at least 4,000 units has been detected approaching the Hyperion system. Our evacuation task force should have arrived only a short while before the oysters. The consul understood Gladstone's hesitation. An oyster migration cluster might consist of ships ranging in size from single-person ram scouts to canned cities and comet forts, holding tens of thousands of the interstellar barbarians. The Force Joint Chiefs believe that this is the oysters' big push, said Maida Gladstone. The ship's computer had positioned the hollow so that the woman's sad brown eyes seemed to be staring directly at the consul. Whether they seek to control just Hyperion for the time tubes, or whether this is an all-out attack on the world web, remains to be seen. In the meantime, the frickin' sun is glaring on me like crazy right now. Jeez. Let me sit in a different position where the sun is not making me hot as hell. Whew. Sorry about that. Okay. I think I'm right here. Whether they seek to control just Hyperion for the time tombs, or whether this is an all-out attack on the world web, remains to be seen. In the meantime, a full-force space battle fleet, complete with a Farcaster construction battalion, has spun up from the CAM system to join the evacuation task force, but this fleet may be recalled depending upon circumstances. The consul nodded and absently raised the scotch to his lips. He frowned at the empty glass and dropped it onto the thick carpeting of the hollow pit. Even with no military training, he understood the difficult tactical decision Gladstone and the Joint Chiefs were faced with. Unless a military Farcaster were hurriedly constructed in the Hyperion system at staggering expense, there would be no way to resist the oyster invasion. Whatever secrets the time tombs might hold would go to the hegemony enemy. If the fleet did construct a Farcaster in time, and the hegemony committed, that is such a freaking weird word to say, committed the total resources of force to defending the single distant colonial world of Hyperion, the world web ran the terrible risk of suffering an oyster. I'm guessing that's I hope I'm saying some of this stuff right. Attack elsewhere on the perimeter, or, in a worst-case scenario, having the barbarians actually seizing the Farcaster and penetrating, oh god, the web itself. Oh, okay. The consul tried to imagine the reality of armored oyster troops stepping through Farcaster portals into the defended home cities on the 100 worlds. The consul walked through the hollow of Maida Gladstone, retrieved his glass, and went to pour another scotch. "You have been chosen to join the pilgrimage to the Shrike," said the image of the old CEO, whom the press loved to compare to Lincoln or Churchill or Alvarez Temp or whatever other pre-Hegera legend was in historical vogue at the time. "The Templars are sending their tree ship, oh my gosh, Yggdrasil, said Gladstone. Goddamn, and the evacuation task force commander has instructions to let it pass with a 3-week time debt. You can rendezvous with the Yggdrasil before it does quantum from the Parvati system. The 6 other pilgrims chosen by the Shrike Church will be aboard the tree ship. God damn, these words are freaking ridiculous. I thought Lord of the Rings books were going to be hard. Our intelligence report suggests that at least one of the 7 pilgrims is an agent of the oysters. Man, the frickin' enemy called an oyster. We do not, at this time, have any way of knowing which one it is. The consul had to smile. Among all of the other risks Gladstone was taking, the old woman had to consider the possibility that he was the spy, and that she was fatlining crucial information to an oyster agent. Or had she given him any crucial information? The fleet movements were detectable as soon as the ships used their hawking drives, and if the consuls were the spy, the CEO's revelation... Oh, it's just a regular message that pops up. Might be a way to scare him off. The consul's smile faded, and he drinks his scotch. Solwood Traub and Fedman Cassad are among the 7 pilgrims chosen, said Gladstone. God damn, the sun is like trying to approach in my space. We need your help, said Maina Gladstone. It is essential that the secrets of the time tombs and the Shrike be uncovered. This pilgrimage may be our last chance. If the oysters conquer Hyperion, their agent must be eliminated, and the time tombs sealed at all costs. The fate of the hegemony may depend upon it. The transmission ended, except for the pulse of rendezvous coordinates. Response, asked the ship's computer. Despite the tremendous energies involved, the spacecraft was capable of placing a brief coded squirt into the incessant babble of FTL bursts, which tied the human portions of the galaxy together. No, said the consul, and went outside to lean on the balcony railing. Night had fallen, and the clouds were low. No stars were visible. The darkness would have been absolute, except for the intermittent flash of lightning to the north and a soft phosphorescence. What the frick? Rising from the marshes. The consul was suddenly very aware. I'm sure that's a word I know, I just being a dumbass. Aware that he was at that second, the only sentient being on an unnamed world. He listened to the antediluvian night suns rising from the swamps, and he thought about morning, about setting out in the Viken EMV at first light, about spending the day in sunshine, about hunting big game in the fern forests to the south, and then returning to the ship in the evening for a good steak and a cold beer. The consul thought about the sharp pleasure of the hunt and the equally sharp solace of solitude. Solitude he had earned through the pain and nightmare he had already suffered on Hyperion. The consul went inside, brought the balcony in, and sealed the ship. Just just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall, he climbed the spiral staircase to his sleeping cabin at the apex of the ship. The circular room was dark except for silent explosions of lightning, which outlined rivulets of rain coursing the skylight. The console stripped lay back on the firm mattress and switched on the sound system. An external audio picks up. He listened as the fury of the storm blended with the violence of Wagner's Flight of the Valkyries. Hurricane winds buffeted the ship. The sound of thunderclaps filled the room as the skylight flashed white, leaving images burning in the console's retinas. Wagner is good only for thunderstorms, he thought. He closed his eyes, but the lightning was visible through closed eyelids. He remembered the glint of ice crystals blowing through the tumbled ruins on the low hills near the time tombs, and the colder gleam of steel on the Shrike's impossible tree of metal thorns. He remembered screams in the night, and he hundred facet ruby and red blood gaze of the Shrike itself. Hyperion, the console, silently commanded the computer to shut off all speakers and raised his wrist to cover his eyes. In the sudden silence he lay thinking about how insane it would be to return to Hyperion during his 11 years as consul on the distant and enigmatic world. The mysterious Church of the Shrike had allowed a dozen barges of off-world pilgrims to depart for the windswept barrens around the time tombs. North of the mountains, no one had returned, and that had been in normal times when the Shrike had and the anti-entropic fields had been contained to the few dozen meters around the time tombs, and there had been no threat of an oyster invasion. The consul thought of the Shrike, free to wander everywhere on Hyperion, of the millions of indigenous and thousands of hegemony citizens helpless before a creature which defied physical laws and which communicated only through death, and he shivered despite the warmth of the cabin. Hyperion. The night and storm passed. Another storm front raced ahead of the approaching dawn. Gymnosperms 200 meters tall bent and whipped before the coming torrent. Just before first light, the consul's ebony spaceship rose on a tail of blue plasma and bunched through thickening clouds as it climbed towards space and rendezvous. Chapter 1. The consul awoke with the peculiar headache, dry throat, and sense of having forgotten 1,000 dreams. You need to practice doing your read-along of books. This is what happens when you don't. I don't mind doing it more genuine, and I like being able to add a bit of personality, even if it means I'm kind of I guess narrating on its own or commentating on certain things, whether I mess up or there's something else. These aren't meant to be like perfect audio books and stuff. It's just me doing a read along of a book, whether I've read it or not. And this one I have not read, so I very much think I'm going to mess up either way. Alright, Where was I? Having forgotten 1,000 dreams, which only periods in cryogenic fugue could bring. He blinked, sat upright on the low couch, and, groggily pushed away the last sensor tapes clinging to his skin. There were 2 very short crew clones and 1 very tall hooded Templar with him in the windowless void of a room. One of the clones offered the consul the traditional post-thaw glass of orange juice. He accepted it and drank greedily. The tree is 2 light minutes and 5 hours of travel from Hyperion, said the Templar. And the consul realized that he was being addressed by Het Mastine, captain of the Templar tree ship and true voice of the tree. The consul vaguely realized that it was a great honor to be awakened by the captain, but he was too groggy and disoriented from the fugue to appreciate it. The others have been awake for some hours, said Het Mastine, and gestured for the clones to leave them. They have assembled on the foremost dining platform. Said the consul and took a drink. He cleared his throat and tried again. Thank you, Het Mastine, he managed, looking around at the egg-shaped room and its carpet of dark grass. I feel like this is exactly how I feel reading some of these words and names. Alright, what did it say? Okay, translucent walls and support ribs of continuous curved weirwood. The consul realized that he must be in one of the smaller environment pods. Closing his eyes, he tried to recall his memories of rendezvous. Just before the Templar ship went quantum, the consul remembered his first glimpse of the kilometer-long tree ship as he closed for rendezvous. The tree ship's details blurred by the redundant machine and erg-generated containment fields, which surrounded it like a spherical mist, but its leafy bulk clearly ablaze with thousands of lights which shone softly through leaves and thin-walled environment pods, or along countless platforms, bridges, command decks, stairways, and bowers. Around the base of the tree ship, engineering and cargo spheres clustered like oversized gals, while blue and violet drive streamers trailed behind like 10-kilometer-long routes. The others await, Het Mastine said softly and nodded toward low cushions where the consul's luggage lay, ready to open upon his command. The Templar gazed thoughtfully at the weirwood. My goodness, the frickin' sun. This is just closing in on me. Slowly, I'm going to die. It's like a frickin' James Bond laser coming at me. Thoughtfully at the weirwood rafters, while the consul dressed in semi-formal evening wear of loose black trousers, polished ship boots, a white silk blouse which ballooned at waist and elbows, topaz collar, cinch, black demi-coat, complete with slashes of hegemony crimson on the epaulets, and a soft gold tricorn. And by the way, I would have my fan on or something, but it's too loud, and it would probably just ruin the audio more than whatever it is right now. I don't know if it's doing good or bad for you guys, I'm going to definitely see when when the video goes up. But it will be up for everybody. If there are problems, I will definitely redo the video. And that's totally fine with me, though I will feel like everything I did here will probably be for nothing. No, just kidding. Okay, a section of curved wall became a mirror, and the console stared at the image there. A more than middle-aged man in semi-informal evening wear. Sunburned skin, but oddly pale under the sad eyes. The consul frowned, nodded, and turned away. Hetmastine gestured, and the consul, my bag moved, followed the tall, robed figure through a dilation in the pod into an ascending walkway, which curved up and out of sight around the massive bark wall of walkway, and took a quick step back. It was at least 600 meters down, being created by a 1/6 standard gravity being, generated by the singularities imprisoned at the base of the tree, and there were no railings. They resumed their silent ascent, turning off from the main trunk walkway, 30 meters and half a trunk spiral later to cross a flimsy suspension bridge to a 5-meter wide branch. They followed this outward to where the riot of leaves caught the glare of Hyperion's sun. "Has my ship been brought out of storage?" asked the consul. "It is fueled and ready in Sphere 11, said Hetmastine. They passed into the shadow of the trunk, and stars became visible in the black pit patches between the dark latticework of leaves. The other pilgrims have agreed to ferry down in your ship if the Force authorities give permission," added the Templar. I'm guessing that's FORCE. It's supposed to be an acronym, maybe? The consul rubbed his eyes and wished that he had been allowed more time to retrieve his wits from the cold grip of cryonic fugue. "You've been in touch with the task force?" "Oh yes, we were challenged the moment we tunneled down, and from Quantum Leap. A hegemony warship is escorting us this very moment." There's a lot of like pauses with little 3 dots in between. We've seen like 3 of those now. Hetmastine gestured toward a patch of sky above them. The consul squinted upward, but at the second segments of the upper tiers of branches revolved out of the tree ship's shadow, and acres of leaves ignited in sunset hues. Even in the still shadowed places, glowbirds nestled like Japanese lanterns above lighted walkways, glowing swing vines, and illuminated hanging bridges, while fireflies from old Earth and radiant gossameres from Mao Covenant blinked and coded their way through labyrinths of leaves, mixing with constellations sufficiently to fool even the most star-wise traveler. Hetmastine stepped into a basket, lift hanging from the whiskered carbon cable, which disappeared into the tree 100 meters of tree above them. The consul followed, and they were borne silently upward. He noted that the walkways, pods, and platforms were conspicuously empty. except for a few Templars and their diminutive crew, clone counterparts. The consul could recall seeing no other passengers during his rushed hour between rendezvous and fugue, but he had put that down to the imminence of the tree ship going quantum, assuming then that the passengers were safe in their fugue coaches. Now, however, the tree ship was traveling far below relativistic relativistic velocities, and its branches should be crowded with gawking passengers. He mentioned his observation to the Templar. "The 6 of you are our only passengers," said Hetmastine. The basket stopped in the maze of foliage, and the tree ship captain led the way up a wooden escalator, worn with age. The consul blinked in surprise. A Templar tree ship normally carried between 2,000 and 5,000 passengers. It was easily the most desirable way to travel between the stars. Tree ships rarely accrued more than a 4 or 5 month time debt, making short scenic crossings where star systems were a very few light years apart, thus allowing their affluent passengers to spend a little time as necessary in fugue, for the tree ship to make the trip to Hyperion and back, accumulating 6 years of web time with no paying passengers would mean a staggering financial loss to the Templars. Then the consul realized belatedly that the tree ship would be ideal for the upcoming evacuation, its expenses ultimately to be reimbursed by the hegemony. Still, the consul knew to bring a ship as beautiful and vulnerable as the Yggdrasil, one of the only 5 of its kind, into a war zone was a terrible risk for the Templar Brotherhood. "Your fellow pilgrims," announced Hetmastine, as he and the consul emerged into a broad platform where a small group waited at one end of the long wooden table above them. The stars burned, rotating occasionally at the tree ship, changing its pitch or yaw, while to either side a solid sphere of foliage curved away like the green skin of some great fruit. The consul immediately recognized the setting as the captain's dining platform, even before the 5 other passengers rose to let Hetmastine take his place at the head of the table. The consul found an empty chair waiting for him to the left of the captain. When everyone was seated and quiet, Hetmastine made formal introductions, although the consul knew none of the others from personal experience. Several of the names were familiar, and he used his diplomat's long training to file away identities and impressions. To the consul's left sat Father Linar Hoyt, a priest of the old-style Christian sect, known as Catholic. For a second the consul had forgotten the significance of the black clothing and Roman collar. Then he remembered St. Francis Hospital on Hebron, where he had received alcohol trauma therapy after his disastrous first diplomatic assignment. There almost 4 standard decades earlier, and at the mention of Hoyt's name, he remembered another priest, who one who had disappeared on Hyperion halfway through his own tenure. Lenar Hoyt was a young man by the consul's reckoning, no more than the early 30s, but it appeared that something had aged the man terribly. In the not-too-distant past, the consul looked at the thin face, cheekbones pressing against hollow flesh, eyes large but hooded in deep hollows, thin lips set in a permanent twitch of muscle, the downturned to be called even a cynical smile, the hairline not so much receding as ravaged by radiation, and he felt he was looking at the man who had been ill for years. Still, the consul was surprised that behind that mask of concealed pain there remained the physical echo of the boy in the man, the faintest remnants of the round face, fair skin, and soft mouth, which had belonged to a younger, healthier, less cynical Lenar Hoyt. Next to the priest sat a man whose image had been familiar to most citizens of the hegemony some years before. The consul wondered if the collective attention span in the world web was as short now as it had been when he had lived there. Shorter, probably. If so, then Colonel Fedman Cassad, the so-called butcher of the South, consul's generation, and to all those who lived in the slow, experientiate fringe of things, Cassad was not someone one was likely to forget. Colonel Fedman Cassad was tall, almost tall enough to look the 2-meter Hetmastine in the eye, and dressed in force black, with no rank insignia or citations showing. The black uniform was oddly similar to Father Hoyt's garb, but there was no real resemblance between the two men. In lieu of Hoyt's wasted appearance, Cassad was brown, obviously fit and whip-handled lean, with strains of muscle showing in shoulder, wrist, and throat. The colonel's eyes were small, dark, and as encompassing as the lenses got really dark in the room of some primitive video camera. His face was all angles, shadows, planes, and facets, not gaunt like Father Hoyt's, merely carved from cold stone. A thin line of beard along with his jawline served to accent the sharpness of his countenance, as surely as blood on a knife blade. The colonel's intense, slow movements reminded the consul of an earth-bred jaguar he had seen in a private seed ship zoo on Lucis many years before. Cassad's voice was soft, but the consul did not fail to notice that even the colonel's silences commanded attention. Most of the long table was empty. The group clustered at one end. Across from Fedman Cassad sat a man introduced as the poet Martin Silenus. Silenus appeared to be quite the opposite of the military man across from him. Where Cassad was lean and tall, Martin Silenus was short and visibly out of shape. Countering Cassad's stone-cut features, the poet's face was immobile and expressive as an earth primate's. His voice was a loud, profane rasp. There was something, thought the consul, almost pleasantly monic about Martin Silenus, with his ruddy cheeks and broad mouth, pitched eyebrows, sharp ears, and constantly moving hands, sporting fingers long enough to serve a concert pianist or a strangler. The poet's silver hair had been cropped into rough-hewn bangs. Martin Silenus seemed to be in his late 50s, but the consul noticed the telltale blue tinge to throat and palms, and suspected that the man had been through more than a few Paulson treatments. Silenus's true age might be anywhere from 90 to 150 standard years. If he were close to the latter age, the consul knew the odds were that the poet was quite mad. As boisterous and animated as Martin Silenus seemed upon first encounter, so that the next guest at the table exuded an immediate and equally impressive sense of intelligent reticence. Sol Weintraub looked up upon introduction, and the consul noted the short gray beard, lined forehead, and sad, luminous eyes of the well-known scholar. Consul had heard tales of the wandering Jew and his hopeless quest, but he was shocked to realize, why'd the music go out, realize that the old man now held the infant in his arms, his daughter Rachel. Rachel! No more than a few weeks old. The consul looked away. The sixth pilgrim and only woman at the table was Braun Lamia. When introduced, the detective stared at the consul with such intensity that he could feel the pressure of her gaze even after she looked away. A former citizen of the 13G world of Lucis, Braun Lamia was no taller than the poet, 2 chairs to her right, but even her loose corduroy suit did not conceal the heavy layers of muscle on her compact form. Black curls reached to her shoulders. Her eyebrows were 2 dark lines, dabbed horizontally across a wide brow, and her nose was solid and sharp, intensifying the aquiline quality of her stare. Lamia's mouth was wide and expressive to the point of being sensuous, curled slightly at the corners in the slight smile, which might be cruel or merely playful. The woman's dark eyes seemed to dare the observer to discover which was the case. It occurred to the consul that Braun Lamia might well be considered beautiful. Introductions completed, the consul cleared his throat and turned toward the Templar. Hatmastine, you said that there were 7 pilgrims. Is M. Weintraub's child the 7th? Hatmastine's hood moved slowly from side to side. No, only those who make a conscious decision to seek the shrike may be counted among the pilgrims. The group at the table stirred slightly. Each must know that the consul knew. Only a group comprising a prime number of pilgrims might make the Shrike Church-sponsored trip north. I am the 7th, said Hetmestine, captain of the Templar tree ship, Yggdrasil, and true voice of the tree. In the silence which followed the announcement, Hetmestine gestured, and a group of crew clones began serving the pilgrims their last meal before planetfall. "So the oysters are not in the system yet?" asked Braun Lemia. Her voice was a husky, throaty... What's his way of describing things of husky and throaty quality, which strangely stirred the council. "No," said Hetmestine, "but we cannot be more than a few standard days ahead of them. Our instruments have detected fusion skirmishes within the system's Oort cloud." "Will there be war?" asked Father Hoyt. His voice seemed as fatigued as his expression. When no one volunteered a response, the priest turned to his right, as if retractively directing the question to the council. The council sighed. The crew clones had served wine. He wished had been whiskey. "Who knows what the oysters will do?" he said. "They no longer appear to be motivated by human logic." Martin Silenus laughed loudly, spilling his wine as he gestured. "As if we humans were ever motivated by human logic." He took a deep drink, wiped his mouth, and laughed again. Ron Lamia frowned. "If the serious fighting starts too soon," she said, "perhaps the authorities will not allow us to land." "We will be allowed to pass," said Hetmestine. Sunlight found its way past folds in the coil to fall on yellowish skin. "Saved from the certain death in the war to be delivered to certain death at the hands of the Shrike," murmured Father Hoyt. "There is no death in all of the universe," intoned Martin Silenus, in a voice which the council felt sure could have wakened someone deep in the cryogenic fugue. The poet drained the last of his wine and raised the empty goblet in a apparent toast to the stars. "No smell of death. There shall be no death. Moan, moan, moan. Cybele, moan. For thy..." Is he moaning? What? "Thy pernicious babes have changed a god into a shaking palsy. Moan, brethren, moan. For I have no strength left, weak as the reed, weak, feeble as my voice. Oh, the pain of feebleness. Moan, moan, for still I thaw." Silenus abruptly broke off. What the hell was that? With the moan, moan. Broke off and poured more wine, belching once into the silence which had followed his recitation. The other six looked at one another. The consul noticed the soul when Traub was smiling slightly until the baby in his arms stirred and distracted him. "Well," said Father Hoyt hesitantly, as if trying to retrieve an earlier stand of thought, "if the hegemony convoy leaves and the oysters take Hyperion, perhaps the occupation will be bloodless, and they'll let us go about our business." Colonel Fedman Cassad laughed softly. The oysters don't want to occupy Hyperion, he said. If they take the planet, they'll loot what they want, and then do what they do best. They'll burn the cities into charred rubble, break the rubble into smaller pieces, and then bake the pieces until they glow. They'll melt the poles, boil the oceans, and then use the residue to salt what's left of the continents, so nothing will ever grow there again. Well, began Father Hoyt, and then trailed off. There was no conversation as the clones cleared the soup and salad dishes and brought on the main course. You said that there was a Hegemony's warship escorting us, the consul said to Het Mustine as they finished their roast beef and boiled sky squid. The Templar nodded and pointed. The consul squinted but could make out nothing moving against the rotating starfield. Here, said Fedman Cassad, and leaned across Father Hoyt to hand the consul a collapsible pair of military binoculars. The consul nodded his thanks, thumbed on the power, and scanned the patch of sky Het Mustine had indicated. Gyroscopic crystals in the binoculars hewn slightly as they stabilized the optics and swept the area and the programmed search pattern. Suddenly the image froze, blurred, expanded, and steadied. The consul could not avoid an involuntary intake of breath as the Hegemony ship filled the viewer. Neither the expected field blurred seed of a solo ram scout nor the bulb of the torch ship. The electronically outlined image was out of a matte black attack carrier. The thing was impressive in the way only warships through the centuries had succeeded in being. The Hegemony spin ship was incongruously streamlined, with its 4 sets of boom arms retracted in battle readiness. Its 60-meter command probe sharp as a Clovis point, and its Hawking drive and fusion blisters set far back along the launch shaft, it like feathers on an arrow. The consul handed the binoculars back to Cassad. Without comment, if the task force was using a full attack carrier to escort the Yggdrasil, what kind of firepower were they setting in place to meet the oyster invasion? How long until we land? Asked Ron Lamia. She had been using her comlog to access the tree ship's data sphere, and obviously was frustrated with what she had found, or had not found. 4 hours until orbit, murmured Het Mustine. A few minutes more by dropship. Our consular friend has offered his private craft to ferry you down. To Keats, said Sol Weintraub. It was the first time the scholar had spoken since dinner had been served. The consul nodded. It's still the only spaceport on Hyperion set to handle passengers' vehicles, he said. Spaceport? Father Hoyt sounded angry. I thought that we were going straight to the north, to the Shrike's realm. Het Mustine patiently shook his head. Pilgrimage always begins from the capital, he said. It will take several days to reach the time tombs. Several days, snapped Braun Lamia. That's absurd. Perhaps, perhaps, agreed Hetmestine, but it is the case nonetheless. Father Hoyt looked as if something in the meal had caused him indigestion, even though he had eaten almost nothing. "Look," he said, "couldn't we change the rules this once? I mean, given this war scare and all, and just land near the time tombs or wherever and get it over with?" The consul shook his head. Spacecraft and aircraft have been trying to take the short route to the northern moors for almost 400 years, he said. "I know of none who made it." "May one inquire," said Martin Silenus, happily raising his hand like a schoolboy, "just what the gibbering happens to these legions of ships?" Father Hoyt frowned at the poet Fedman. Cassad smiled slightly. So Weintraub said, "The council did not mean to suggest that the area is inaccessible. One may travel by ship or various land routes, nor do spacecraft and aircraft disappear. They easily land near the ruins of the time tombs and just as easily return to whatever point their computers command. It is merely the pilots and passengers who are never seen again." Weintraub lifted the sleeping baby from his lap and set her in an infant carrier slung around his neck. So the tired old legend goes," said Braun Lamea. "What do the ship logs show?" "Nothing," said the consul. "No violence, no forced entry, no deviation from course, no unexplained time lapses, no unusual energy emissions or depletions, no physical phenomena of any sort." "No passengers?" said Hetmestine. The consul did a slow double take. If Hetmestine had indeed just attempted a joke, it was the first sign in all of the council's decades of dealing with the Templars that one of them had shown even a nascent sense of humor. What the consul could see of the captain's vaguely oriental features beneath the coil gave no hint that a joke had been attempted. "Marvelous melodrama," laughed Silenus. "A real-life, Christ-weeping Sargasso of souls, and we're for it. Who orchestrates this crap-pot of the plot, anyway?" "Shut up," said Braun Lamea. "You're drunk, old man." The consul sighed. The group had been tougher for less than a standard hour. Crew clones swept away the dishes and brought dessert trays, showcasing sherbets, coffees, tree-ship fruits, drams, torts, and concoctions made a chocolate. Martin Silenus waved away the desserts and told the clones to bring him another bottle of wine. The consul reflected a few seconds and then asked for a whiskey. "It occurs to me," Sol Weintraub said, as the group was finishing dessert, "that our survival may depend upon our talking to one another." "What do you mean?" asked Braun Lamea. Weintraub unconsciously rocked the child sleeping against his chest. "For instance, does anyone here know why he or she was chosen by the Shrike Church and the All Thing to go on this voyage?" No one spoke. "I thought not," said Weintraub. Even more fascinating, is anyone here a member or follower of the Church of the Shrike? I, for one, am a Jew, and however confused my religious notions have become these days, they do not include the worship of an organic killing machine. Wintrob raised heavy eyebrows and looked around the table. I am the true voice of the tree, said Het Mastine. While many Templars believe that the Shrike is the avatar of punishment for those who do not feed from the root, I must consider this a heresy not founded in the covenant of the writings of Miar. To the captain's left, the consul shrugged. I am an atheist, he said, holding the glass of whiskey to the light. I have never been in contact with the Shrike cult. Father Hoyt smiled with humor. The Catholic Church ordained me, he said. Shrike worship contradicts everything the Church defends. Colonel Hassad shook his head, whether in refusal to respond or to indicate that he was not a member of the Shrike Church. It was not clear. Martin Silenus made an expansive gesture. I was baptized a Lutheran, he said, a subset which no longer exists. I helped create Zen Gnosticism before any of your parents were born. I have been a Catholic, a revelationist, a neo-Marxist, an interface zealot, a bound shaker. Okay, a Satanist. Okay, great. A bishop in the Church of Jake's Nada, and a dues-paying subscriber to my channel. No, I'm just getting to the absurd Reincarnation Institute. Now I am happy to say I am a simple pagan. He smiled at everyone. To a pagan, he concluded, the Shrike is a most acceptable. Okay, what? This is different from what I expected this to be. I ignore religions, said Braun Lemia. I do not succumb to them. My point has been made, I believe, said Sol Wintrob. None of us admits to subscribing to the Shrike. It's so weird saying subscribing to something like this. To the Shrike cult dogma. Yet the elders of that perceptive group have chosen us over many millions of the petitioning faithful to visit the time tombs and their fierce god in what may be the last such pilgrimage. The consul shook his head. Your point may be made, Wintrob, he said, but I fail to see it. The scholar absently stroked his beard. I would seem that our reasons for returning to Hyperion are so compelling that even the Shrike Church and the hegemony prohibitively intelligence is agree that we deserve to return, he said. Some of these reasons, mine, for instance, may appear to be public knowledge, but I am certain that none are known in their entirety, except to the individuals at this table. I suggest that we share our stories in the few days remaining to us. Why? Said Colonel Hassad. It would seem to serve no purpose. Wintrob smiled. On the contrary, it would, at the very least, amuse us, and give at least a glimpse of our fellow travelers' souls before the Shrike or some other calamity distracts us. Beyond that, it might just give us enough insight to save all of our lives if we are intelligent enough to find the common thread of experience which binds all our fates to the whim of the Shrike. Martin Silenus laughed and closed his eyes. He said, straddling each a dolphin's back and steadied by a fin, those innocents relived their death, their wounds open again. That's Linesta, isn't it? Said Father Hoyt. I studied her in seminary. Close, said Silenus, opening his eyes and pouring more wine. It's Yeats. Yeet? Bugger lived 500 years before Linesta tugged at her mother's metal tate. What? I almost thought that was something. What? Look, said Lumea. What good would telling each other stories do? When we meet the Shrike, we tell it what we want. One of us is granted the wish, and the others die. Correct? So goes the myth, said Weintraub. The Shrike is no myth, said Cassad, nor its steel tree. So why bore each other with stories? Asked Braun Lamea, spearing the last of her chocolate cheesecake. Weintraub gently touched the back of his sleeping infant's head. We live in strange times, he said, because we are part of that 1/10 of 1% of the hegemony's citizens who traveled between the stars rather than along the web. We represent odd epochs of our own recent past. I, for example, am 68 standard years old, but because of the time debts my travels could have incurred, I might have spread these 68 years across well more than a century of hegemony history. So, said the woman next to him. Weintraub opened his hand in a gesture which included everyone at the table. Among us, hey, I know that game, we represent islands of time, as well as separate oceans of perspective, or perhaps more aptly put, each of us may hold a piece of the puzzle no one else had been able to solve since humankind first landed on Hyperion. Weintraub scratched his nose. It is a mystery, he said, and to tell the truth, I am intrigued by mysteries, even if this is to be my last week of enjoying them. I would welcome some glimmer of understanding, but failing that, working on the puzzle will suffice. I agree, said Hetmestine, with no emotion. It had not occurred to me, but I see the wisdom of telling our tales before we confront the Shrike. But what's to keep us from lying? Asked Ron Lumea. Nothing, Martin Silenus grinned. That's the beauty of it. We should put it to a vote, said the consul. He was thinking about Maida Gladstone's contention that one of the group was an oyster agent. Would hearing the stories be a way of revealing the spy? The consul smiled at the thought of an agent so stupid. Who decided that we are a happy little democracy? Colonel Cassad asked dryly. We had better be, said the consul, To reach our individual goals, this group needs to reach the Shrike regions together. We require some means of making decisions. We could appoint a leader, said Kassad. Piss on that, the poet said in a pleasant tone. Others at the table also shook their heads. All right, said the consul. We vote. Our first decision relates to M. Lentraub's suggestion that we tell the stories of our past involvement with Hyperion. All or nothing, said Hatmastine. We each share our story, or none does. We will abide by the will of the majority. Agreed, said the consul, suddenly curious to hear the others tell their stories, and equally sure that he would never tell his own. Though, what the hell? Sorry, that's weird. Okay, where was I? Okay, all or nothing. Steve agreed, the consul. Okay. Those in favor of telling our tales? Yes, said Sol Lentraub. Yes, said Hetmastine. Absolutely, said Martin Silenus. I would miss this little comic farce for a month. Castle Bats on show. Wow, what is... Some things I'm not happy to read in this. Or I just don't enjoy reading. That's what I'm... I vote yes also, said the consul, surprising himself. Those opposed? Nay, said Father Hoyt, but there was no energy in his voice. I said it's stupid, said Braun Lamea. The consul turned to Kassad. Colonel Fedman, Kassad shrugged. I register 4 yes votes, 2 negatives, and 1 abstention, said the consul. The A's have it. Who wants to start? The table was silent. Finally, Martin Silenus looked up from where he had been writing on a small pad of paper. He tore a sheet into several smaller ships. I have recorded numbers from 1 to 7, he said. Why don't we draw lots and go in the order we draw? That seems rather childish, doesn't it? Said Lamea. I'm a childish fellow, responded Silenus, with his satire smile. Ambassador, he nodded toward the consul. Could I borrow that gilded pillow you're wearing for a hat? The consul handed over his tricorn. The folded slips were dropped in, and the hat passed around. Sol Lentraub was the first to draw, Martin Silenus the last. The consul unfolded his slip, making sure that no one else could see it. He was number 7. Tension ebbed out of him like air out of an overinflated balloon. It was quite possible, he reasoned, that events would intercede before he had to tell his story, or the war would make everything academic, or the group could all lose interest in stories, or the king could die, or the horse could die, or he could teach the horse how to talk. No more whiskey, thought the consul. Who's first? Asked Martin Silenus. In the brief silence the consul could hear leaves stirring to unfelt breezes. I am, said Father Hoyt. The priest's expression showed the same barely submerged acceptance of pain which the consul had seen on the faces of terminally ill friends. Hoyt held up his slip of paper with a large one clearly scrawled on it. "All right," said Silenus. "Start." "Now?" asked the priest. "Why not?" said the poet. The only sign that Silenus had finished at least 2 bottles of wine was a slight darkening of the already ruddy cheeks, and the somewhat more ironic tilt to the pitched eyebrows. "We have a few hours before planetfall," he said, "and I, for one, plan to sleep off the freezer fugue. When we're safely down and settled among the simply natives." "Our friend has a point," Solventraub said softly. "If the tales are to be told, the hour after dinner each day is the civilized time to tell them." Father Hoyt sighed and stood. "Just a minute," he said, and left the dining platform after some minutes had passed. Ron Linnea said, "Do you think he's lost his nerve?" "No," said Lenar Hoyt, emerging from the darkness at the head of the wooden escalator which served as the main staircase. "I needed these." He dropped 2 small stained notebooks on the table as he took his seat. "No fair reading stories from a primer," said Silenus. "These are to be our own tall tales, Magus." "Shut up, damn it," cried Hoyt. He ran a hand across his face, touched his chest. For the second time that night, the consul knew that he was looking at a seriously ill man. "I'm sorry," and said Father Hoyt, "but if I'm to tell my tale, I have to tell someone else's story as well. These journals belong to the man who was the reason for my coming to Hyperion, and why I am returning today." Hoyt took a deep breath. The consul touched the journals. They were begrimed and charred, as if they had survived a fire. "Your friend has old-fashioned tastes," he said, "if he still keeps a written journal." "Yes," said Hoyt. "If you're all ready, I will begin." The group at the table nodded beneath the dining platform. A kilometer of tree ship drove through the cold night with the strong pulse of the living thing. Solventraub lifted his sleeping child from the infant carrier and carefully set her on the cushioned mat on the floor near his chair. He removed his comlog, stood it near the mat, and programmed the disky for white noise. The week-old infant lay on her stomach and slept. The consul leaned far back and found the blue and green star which was Hyperion. It seemed to grow larger even as he watched. Hetmestine drew the coil forward until only shadows showed it for his face. Solventraub lighted a pipe, others accepted refills of coffee and settled back in their chairs. Martin Silenus seemed the most avid and expectant of the listeners as he leaned forward and whispered. He said, "Sign I shall begin the game. What welcome be the cut, the goddess name. Now let us ride." And hearkeneth that what I say. And with that word we riden forth our way, and we began with the right, a merry cheer, his tale anon, and said as ye may hear. The priest's tale, the man who cried God. The next part. your chapter part, I'm guessing. Man, freaking Elden Ring's still a beautiful ass game. Well, still quite a bit of the book, but we got through quite a bit here. Did I just lose a page? Okay, we got through to 25 pages here. And in total there are like 450 pages. 482 pages. Well, half of the 82. So 482 and a half, or 81 and a half, I should say. Jeez. Very religious tones to it. I'm guessing because it's like a Church of the Shrike. Yeah, I didn't expect so much from that side of things. I thought it would be like creating their own. But they introduced so many that were existing in the real world, so I'm guessing like this is real world. Mixing into like a future. And then there was just some things I didn't like reading certain words. They had the F word a couple of times. Orgy, or orgasm, or whatever. I was not happy to see stuff like that. I don't like reading. Even though I'm probably going to read the It book. Which I know what goes on in that fucking book. I will try to stay away from certain things in that book. If I have problems with this one, I might replace the words, or just not say them. This was somewhat not like it felt like it went by a little quicker than I thought it was. So, because some books usually feel slower, or like they're a drag or something. I know some of the other books will definitely probably feel like that. But I kind of just want to get to the Shrike already. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing more ridiculous words. That's another thing that's like throwing me off. It's weird because I love like Lord of the Rings stuff. Okay, it's not. Oh my goodness, chapter 2 is far in there at the 102nd page. Jeez. This is a book that that I'm actually yeah, I don't know what to think. It says it's a Hugo Award-winning book. So far, sadly, I think I would have to get through more of the book to maybe get more into it. But I'm not into it to start with, and I'm guessing for most books that's not always the case. I know some books that are like that. You need time for it to pick up. Matter of fact, I heard something recently about the Way of Kings book. Like some people I've heard said you have to get to the 700th page to really get things picking up or whatever, and I'm just like, look, if it takes 700 pages, I don't know if that's a good thing. But maybe they're not necessarily saying that the rest of it is bad or anything. It's just, I'm guessing they're saying if you really want things to really go somewhere that, or really pick up in a way that interests you more so than the beginning parts or even the middle, then that's where it starts. Yeah, I don't know. I want to check this out. I heard it was a whole Hugo award-winning book. And it's already got weird words. I don't know if I'll remember these characters. Yeah, I don't know. This... Yeah, I'll try to read more. I'll try and read more of this as I go. Yeah. That's just me though, because like sometimes I can get touchy on certain things. There are certain things I don't like. I should make a video of this sometime, but I will say that there are certain movies, horror movies in particular, that I will never watch. And certain other things. That'll be for another video. And this... yeah, I don't know what to think of this book yet, even though I'm not very far in it. Yeah, I don't know, this is not what I expected of it, basically. So I don't know what I'm trying to say. And then I'm going to be reading some H.P. Lovecraft, and I know that stuff has cult crap. As well as I played Silent Hill. Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. I have more books. The reason I'm reading this right now, though, is because it is a library book. And I would want to read it before I need to return it. So that's why I'm starting it. And we'll probably wait on reading the rest of the other books. So we will see. Yeah, I didn't expect this book to go the direction it went with the beginning. So, yeah. I guess I didn't know what to expect. But we'll see. Alright, I'll see you guys next time. Like, share, and subscribe, leave your comments below, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.